Thanks, Robert. And thanks, Suzanne and Leonard and Steve, of course. Leonard, thank you for running the slides for me.
Very welcome. You can see it?
I can see that. Yeah.
Awesome. If you can see it, everyone can see it.
Okay, perfect. Well, Robert, thank you for that introduction. I think that um, it's really an important thing to understand as a as a community in this moment, the importance of a regional agricultural system, not just because of the food, but because of the richness of art and nourishment and health and open space and access and all these other things that come into it. And I love when people acknowledge that intersection of art and science, and for that matter, intuition, and connection and confidence that comes in the commitment of community around agriculture, which is something that we sorely are at a loss for in this country, particularly, but even around the world, and certainly has affected um, not just our eating habits and our diets, but our climate and our social structures. So I feel really grateful to have landed at Stone Barns when I did at the beginning of our nonprofit back in 2003. This is the top view. And you can see it overlooks, we are very close. We're about 2 miles from the Hudson, and about 30 minutes north of Manhattan. Stone Barns sits is a beautiful stone barn complex that sits sort of centrally in about a 2,000 acre park preserve, the Rockefeller State Park Preserve, for which I'll explain a little bit more. But Stone Barns, as the nonprofit and our farmer community, manages and cares for, stewards about 500 acres of land, 400 in pastures, and about 100 acres of forest lots with animals and conservation management and action plan with the state. But mostly our internal community is really surrounded by chefs, farmers, educators, scientists, artisans, artists, and our community that eats from this farm, from this land. See the next. It's a picture of our mixed vegetable fields and some more of our pastures here. We do year-round growing, four-season farming, and mixed rotations. So one of the really important things as a general set of principles for our type of farming, call it regenerative or organic or biodynamic or ecological, the principles are the same and they're ancient. They are really mimics of what happens in nature. Um, Nature loves diversity and it loves exercise. It loves movement and flow and change. It likes mixed systems, mixed animal systems in the design. It really never has waste. It's something that always puts things back and finds purpose as co-product and reuse and cycle. Um, and it's something that that generates new life, self-renewing, self-regenerating. Next. For Stone Barns, I think in any farm that's really talking about generating health and generating community, it has to start from the soil. And this is the not only beginning of all the fertility, but this is all the biology. The entire beginning, biological beginning of our system. And often, if ever I teach a soil class at Stone Barns, which is often to the students and farmers that come work with me, I always start the conversation by pointing out that these barns are essentially built from what the same material that my soil is built from. That this granite, schist, and gneiss that these buildings are made of is the parent material after 10,000 years of a glacier. And that these soils have just built over the years of tree roots and moss and grasses and animals. and that what we're doing is essentially kind of a blip on the screen here. And it's really our purpose as farmers to steward that land and improve that land for the betterment of where it's going, not to use it as an exploit, but to be caretakers for the time we're here and to really help people understand that aesthetic um, in being on it, in eating from it, and enjoying the experience of being on it, on that land. And that's the aesthetic of seeing. It's also the aesthetic of taste. For, it's very very important to remember that every time we eat, the memory of the flavor and all of the things that come to us when we eat something um, can be improved by how much we know about it and how much we're nourished by it, not just by the minerals and vitamins that are in it, but by where it came from and who it benefited. Next slide. So really the first thing we do is start with the soil. And that's with mixed crops and systems. So one of our biggest principles really is to practice crop rotation. And all of our fields work on planting schedules that are anywhere between 7 and 10 years. They're mixed family groups. This is a picture of a mixed cover crop of buckwheat and clovers and rye and oats and physalis and vetch, and right next to it is a field of barley. And beyond that, all the vegetables and everything else, and kind of always moving, always changing in the soil for the purpose of really producing really healthy microbiome in the soil, but also to mitigate plant pathology, all the kind of the disease pressures and things that grow in the soil, and also balance that soil over long periods of time so that the next vegetable that goes there doesn't need to have extensive amounts of input, but actually is just being nourished. And the crop rotation isn't just a series of things, it's literally a procession of health. It's a way that a rooted plant a deep rooted plant may help a plant that is a fruiting crop after that, and that a leaf crop might work better for that in that same way. A cover crop to a tomato, to a parsnip, to a winter squash over years. And that kind of practice, in my experience and in all that I've read, uh, tends to be kind of the same thing. Is that the health of the place and all the pressures that we see in early gardens, like lots of weeds and all that stuff, back off and the health improves. Next slide. Really minimal touch is the key. We had a conversation at Stone Barns. We do have over 100 employees at any one time on the site with our restaurant and the farm and our education programming. And we have quite a bit of people. It is in its own right a small town, a community of artisans and farmers and scientists and chefs that are all exploring stuff. Um, and we have a Thursday staff meeting, and it's a Zoom right now. Sometimes it's in a big room. Usually weekly. It's in, before COVID, we all met together and had a family meal. But now we do a Thursday Zoom. And one of the ways that we try to get everybody to mix with each other is have breakouts. And everyone from my team, every different department gets to each week, a different department chooses a question for the whole group to go into breakout. And today's question was, what does an ecological food culture mean to you? Which came from of course, my scientists, my soil monitoring team, and my birders. And this question is really good because it's about our connection to a place. And here, I like this because this is about us testing small pieces of equipment that give us the most intimacy and the closest contact. As light of a piece of machine we can use, the better in this case, because it gives us a greater intimacy and it allows us to have better empathy for the work that we're doing. Next slide. These next slides we're going to move through pretty quick, Leonard, but I just want to show here that we do grow year round. Underneath all these tunnels right here are about 10,000 pounds of spinach that we plant in the late fall. And we harvest from January all the way through March. And this is, not only is this a great trick to have vegetables outside without heat, but they're also extremely nutrient dense and very sweet and delicious, like you've never had spinach before in the winter climate. So not only are we just sort of beating winter by doing this, we're actually improving everyone's taste buds and nutrition with this product that California just doesn't have a chance with us on this one. We like to say when everyone else is going further afield to get their winter vegetables, you shouldn't go too far for spinach. Okay, next slide. Some other vegetables, really valuable winter vegetables and things, and some breeding that we've been doing. These are some Badger Flame beets here, cut beautiful orange, and some carrots. Next. Plant breeding and trial selection is something of a passion for us all. This is just quickly a corn, an old 8-row Otofile 8-row Italian corn that was actually originally Lenape corn and New York 8-row Flint. Before it ended up in Italy, it became Italy's #1 polenta corn for almost 200 years until it was almost totally extinct because of export polenta. I got this from a great friend, and about 15 years ago, and I've been saving and selecting this really wonderful polenta corn and bringing it back. This pea in the middle is one that I bred about 10 years ago. We call it David's Pocantico Purple, which was really a gift to our benefactor at Stone Barns, David Rockefeller, whose birthday landed on the first pea harvests usually. So, and then these squashes here were really special. These are some great varieties of mini high nutrition squashes that just show the diversity there. Next slide. The floral program and the arts program at Stone Barns continues to bloom and be a really valuable part of our production system, partially because flowers extend into all parts of your room and go beyond food in a way that is nourishing, but also ties to the pollinator relationships on our properties. I'd have to say one of our most interesting partners in the years past is Paula Sharp, who had a great presentation and exhibit at the Bruce Museum several years ago for lots of the bees that she had photographed at Stone Barns. Next slide. And there's some of our friends there. I like this picture because it shows the diversity of all of the different pollen. You can see all the different colors in the hive there. I think that's all really interesting. Shows the diversity of the farm just within the comb. Next slide. In the long run, not only the vegetables are important, but the perennial system. And we're all fairly familiar with things like apples in New York, but there are a lot of other crops that are actually much more appropriate for New York, like chestnuts and pawpaw and American persimmon that require no spray and that produce every year and are uniquely suited to this environment, unlike apples that are native to the Black Sea and have a lot of pests when they're grown in New York. And so some of the ways of us building food forests and helping to reestablish the farm as a part of the natural system is to plant natives that actually, and even naturalized plants that are best suited for this environment. Next. We also do quite a bit of indoor growing. Next picture. And we really celebrate the frost. I love this picture, and it's a thing I learned many years ago from an old grower, Heinz Grotke. He was a biodynamic farmer that I learned from in Rhode Island in my teens. And there's these, we call them ice dragons. And inside a greenhouse on glass, when you get a frost, because there's a lot of relative humidity in a greenhouse, and when the atmosphere in a greenhouse really is good quality, the crystalline structure on the glass grows these long fern-like, dragony kinds of striations. Um, and in chemically managed greenhouses, the ice crystalline on the windows is fragmented and small. I thought that was really interesting. I always think about that because our greenhouse has been now 18 years, zero spray, no organic, no conventional spraying, 10-year crop rotation, and year-round production. So you can take the next picture. Just a shot of that house, half-acre house. Constantly moving, constantly rotating, lots of experimentation in this house, all in soil, cold winter. So right now the temperature in that house is just at 30 degrees and warms up in the day, but just it produces year round. And we try not to control the environment more than just sort of keep the extremes at bay. Next. And next, some barley.
Oh, sorry. Go
That's
ahead.
okay. No, totally fine. And you can even skip through these a little faster too. Some of our field crops. At the end of the day, the fertility that we really rely on is our compost. These are some of our windrows here, managed with animal manures and leaves and that sort of thing. Next. But really, the animal in relation to vegetables and the rest of a farming system for us on the scale that we're at is really about ecological service. Not only that, this is the question to ask is, should we raise animals? Should people eat meat? These questions are really big, big and complex questions for us all to ask in a time of really being concerned about climate change and food access. And I would say that the real question to ask is, are we using animals to their greatest service? Eating those animals would then be another question, but not necessarily the same question. Because recognizing what these animals really do actually gives them a purpose and gives us an ecological purpose. The addition to that is that actually an animal that eats all grass and that does its service is actually healthier for themselves and the land, but also healthier for us and the environment. And that continues to be proven as we look at the quality of grass-fed animals, their effect on the land, and their effect because of their digestion on the ecosystem. The manures that these animals deposit on these pastures stimulate the microbiome in these grasslands and continue to improve the native and naturalized fauna and flora. Next slide. They also have a great view. Pretty nice. Next slide. These are sheep. Next slide. These are goats. Next slide. I'll tell you that I love these goats, and they are a wonderful part of our system, not just for the grass, but there are about 60 miles of carriage trails in the Rockefeller State Park Preserve, which our relationship with the preserve keeps them from using any herbicides and really reduces the mowing in the site significantly. The goats do all the invasive work and they clear all the trail system. So they're working goats, and they also serve a number of different purposes besides, at the end of the day, being celebrated in the restaurant and in homes. Hens also, same way, producing eggs, but also really playing a part of our ecosystem. Working in field cover crops, working post grain, working post crops. Having these animals in the system helps for insect control, is actually a great manure stimulus, especially when we're not adding fertilizers. They are natural fertilizer spreaders. Next. And these hefty fellas, they are part of our forest management system and an entirely waste-fed herd of pigs that we raise about 60 to 80 pigs a year in our forest, all from re-fermented sort of kimchi style brewer's grain leftover milk and vegetables and that sort of thing from the grocery stores and from our compost restaurant. Next. This one blocked it, but behind the barns there is the restaurant inside with all of our chefs and farmers together. Next slide. The real key to this thing is that we are tying everybody together, that we're all part of this. It's not just so the beauty of this, but that we can internalize it. We literally internalize this story every time we eat. This is a garden rotation that we gave to many of our members who put gardens up in their own yards, but also to a program we call the Kitchen Garden Project. And we'll have a short video to play, and then that'll be the end of my presentation here quick. The farmer and the chef are two sides of a very specific coin.
COVID takes over the world and the restaurant gets shuttered. I called Jack and I said, Jack, we had 48 cooks in our kitchen. I got 3 that we should cook up an idea with.
All these chefs were out of work.
It took him a nanosecond to be like, great idea. And then he's off and running.
So there was this moment to put them to work on the farm. And we want people at home to see this. And we realize that you don't really want to learn it from a professional so much. We want to learn it through somebody who's making some fresh mistakes.
We're betting that when restaurants reopen, these cooks will never look at a recipe the same way again. This thing has exploded.
I'm like such a novice in this space, and I'm learning a lot about like every day I'm like learning pretty much like a new term and like a new technique that we're doing. So the kitchen farming project is really incredible. It's a way bigger effect to the world than I thought. It's been crazy to see how many people signing up.
What makes me the most excited is when I see folks in kitchens that are doing it, because you know that they're going through the same emotions as we're going through right now. When I started the project, I was really baby in the garden. And I feel like now, I think it's also great to care for your garden a little bit independently.
My garden is looking good. Everything's growing. I'm going to harvest the new potato soon, probably in these 2 days.
It's not easy to set up a garden on your own, because the reality of this kind of work is it's practice, the same way in the kitchen as it is in the field.
I feel like I've been given a tool set with the kitchen farming project to learn more things and discover more things.
I would not have grown as a cook this much anywhere else.
We want people to recognize that having the small plot of ground opened up, cutting the grass away, a spot that you've walked over 100 times, that you can open that up and have a totally new experience in relationship to that little piece. That's all it takes.
The best thing about the kitchen garden movement, and this is a movement, we're just seeing the beginnings of it, is that it's rooted in pleasure.